Welcome back to K2 News, everybody. You likely have thought about the big one and what would happen in its wake. What kind of damage would be left behind? That idea, what would become of Portland post-disaster, prompted a local author to write a book about the potential fallout. According to Willamette Week, Portland has nearly 20 schools and hundreds of buildings that could collapse during an earthquake due to their construction. She also uncovered some dangers at local schools, and that is the topic of this week's Willamette Week cover story. The author, Emma Pattee, is joining us now to talk about the story, and thanks for being here, Emma. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What prompted you to take on this topic?
I think like a lot of Portlanders, I was really anxious about the earthquake. And, I'm a local journalist. I'm also a writer. So I started working on a novel about it. And in the process of researching the novel, somebody mentioned these unreinforced masonry schools, these brick schools. And I was just shocked to find that there's nearly 20, as you said, brick schools in Portland that would just be incredibly unsafe to be in during an earthquake. And so that sort of prompted my research, which has been sort of the past 2 years working on the article that came out in Willamette Week.
Now, you got PPS to release its latest seismic assessment. What stood out to you in that report?
Yeah, well, I'm not a structural engineer, but when I showed it to engineers, two things really stood out to them. And one is that some of these schools have deficiencies that are so serious that they actually could collapse in the case of an earthquake. And so one expert, said to me that that's just a really big red flag. The second thing is that it wouldn't have to be a mega quake for us to see serious injuries and even fatalities in these brick schools. And so those were the two main things that really jumped out of that report.
What is being done right now for those schools that are at risk of an earthquake?
Well, I think that's what I'm trying to ask in this article. There's ways to retrofit schools, any brick buildings, but they're very expensive. And, PPS is trying to pass a large bond this year to work on school facilities. So I really wanted to put that question to voters, to the community. How do we want this money spent? Everybody agrees these schools are unsafe, but there's also other facilities challenges that PPS is trying to deal with. So it's a question of urgency and priority.
Emma, tell us about your book.
So my book opens with a woman. She's very pregnant. She's at IKEA in Cascade Station, and she's shopping for a crib. She's hungry. She's tired. Her feet are already killing her. And that's the moment that the earthquake hits. And so the book follows her as she makes her way through Portland, trying to get to safety. And I tried to give a really realistic view of what the earthquake would be like, but also to kind of ask the question of how people come together and also turn against each other in the aftermath of these kinds of disasters.
That's what I was going to ask you, is what kind of research did you do to make it as realistic as possible?
I think as a journalist writing a book, it was really important to me that it was as factually accurate as possible. So every street in this book is real. The buildings are real. The destruction to the bridges are real. It's all sort of what is predicted to happen. Any Portlander reading this book, you will probably see your street in this book. People have been reaching out to me to say oh, she walks by my house, which is really cool. I researched soil conditions, liquefaction. I pulled the building plans for IKEA. I interviewed first responders who were on site for some of the major earthquakes of the past couple decades. And I also sent parts of the book to seismic experts and geologists, and even worked with members of the Portland neighborhood emergency team. So, my hope is that it is as accurate as a fiction book can be.
Before we let you go, Emma, anybody wants to get the book, what's the name of it?
It's called Tilt, and it's available at every local bookstore in Portland, and Powell's has just named it Powell's Pick for Portland. So it's also available there as well.
Congratulations to you, Emma Pattee. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it very much. You can read the entire article, latest edition of Willamette Week, on newsstands now or online at wweek.com.